I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
This next guest is one of my favorite people in the world. She wrote a great book years ago called Quiet, about the difference between introverts and extroverts, and I learned a huge amount from that. And now we're talking about her brand new book, Bittersweet, about how the feeling of melancholy can actually make you more creative, more able to connect with others, in a weird way, even more social. But how could you cultivate this feeling in yourself? What sort of exercises and practices can you do? Are you the sort of person who is willing to feel melancholy? What is melancholy? Well, let's find out with Susan Cain. A few years ago, Susan, I wrote an article about, it was something like 10 things for free that I value more than money. And, you know, there was kind of like cliche stuff like laughter. But one thing I put on this list, I think it was number 9 on this list, was melancholy. And people would argue with me. They were like, I don't like to be melancholy. People would say that it means sadness. Why do you like to be melancholy? And I didn't really have an answer, but I just knew it was something, you know, like for instance, I could always trigger melancholy in myself by thinking of my daughters when they were children, and how, you know, we always miss out on some opportunities when they're children, some time to be with them, some bonding time. But then also I miss those very sweet times with them. And that always triggers some melancholy, which I enjoy. It's sad, but it's an enjoyable kind of sadness. And I never really understood that paradox until reading your book, Bittersweet.
Well, thank you. That's the best introduction ever because, yeah, I do feel
I
like
specialize in those.
Yeah, the whole reason I wrote this book was to understand that paradox. And I think this may have been before we officially started recording, when we were trying to figure out volume levels. But you asked me a second ago, are you feeling sad? And well, the answer was no. But also my reaction that I didn't have a chance to say was like, no. And I mean, of course, I do sometimes feel sad. And I don't know, maybe I feel sad more often than the average person. But I don't really feel sad like a lot. It's more that I'm talking about some other kind of state that I think you were just expressing, which is this melancholy, bittersweet state where you feel a kind of connection to passing time and a connection to the fact that this world is a world of sorrows and also a world of joys, and there's some kind of intense beauty in that and some kind of intense joy in all of that. And I've been trying to figure this out my whole life.
I mean, yeah, and because you use a couple different words in the book to refer to like almost like synonyms to melancholy, like when something is sublime, that gives you a similar sort of feeling, or poignancy gives you a similar sort of feeling. Like, because I agree, it's not quite sadness, you know, like, but maybe give an example, or what's the difference between sadness and melancholy in your mind? Like, maybe give an example of one versus the other.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, for me, this book actually really started with what is my most intense example, although there's so many, and that is listening to sad or minor key music. And I had this experience once back when I was a law student a gazillion years ago, and I was sitting in my law school dorm, and some friends came to the dorm room to pick me up to go to class. And I was blasting out on my stereo speakers, some kind of melancholic minor key music, which I listen to a lot. And my friends were like, "Why are you listening to this funeral music?" And at the time that seemed funny, and I laughed, and we went to class, and that was the end of it, except that I could not stop thinking about that question. Because, well, first of all, why is it that listening to that music is kind of vaguely embarrassing, except when done privately and at midnight? So what is it about our culture that makes it so? But also, that kind of music, and I know many people feel this because I've since researched this, it makes you feel a kind of sense of transcendence. It's a kind of state of communion with all the beings that have known the sorrow that music is expressing. And then there's a sense of awe that the musician is able to transform sorrow into beauty. So it was really trying to understand that got me down this garden path.
And by the way, you would mention different songs and music that you listen to and I would listen to it as you recommended it. While I was reading the book, I
Oh,
would say,
wow.
"Alexa, play this now. Alexa, play Leonard Cohen. Alexa, play this adagio in whatever G minor."
Yeah.
And you mentioned an interesting statistic near the beginning of the book, which is that in the '60s, most music was not written in minor keys. It was very poppy and positive and happy, and everyone's at a party or at the beach or whatever.
Mhm.
And now the majority of even popular music is written in minor keys. Why do you think that transformation happened?
I think we've just become more comfortable with complex emotions as the culture has moved to being able to talk more about the reality of being human. I think the music follows suit. And there's this other amazing study that has found that for people whose favorite songs on their playlists are the happy, upbeat dance tunes, they'll listen to those about on an average of 175 times. But the people whose favorites are their sad songs listen to those 800 times. So it's like
Yeah.
175 compared to 800.
I remember you writing that statistic and then thinking about on it, it's really true. I mean, even one step further, like if like I love really good theme songs to TV shows, and the best ones that I'm thinking of are all like heavily minor key, and I'll just listen to them over and over. I'll watch like the video of the trailer over and over and over again, like on YouTube.
Yeah. And well, I mean, I'm curious if you feel the following thing, because when researchers have asked people, like, why do they do this? They'll inevitably say that the music is connected somehow to like wonder and awe and joy. So like they call this the sublime emotions. And people say that's why they listen to this kind of music. And so for me, that was like the paradox of why should it be that something ostensibly sad could give rise to the most uplifted emotions that humans are capable of. That was really the question I wanted to answer. And like what I ended up seeing is it wasn't just music, it's just this state of being in general, like this melancholic state is connected to creativity and to human connection in general. So we should be talking about it more.
Yeah, so kind of the idea of the book correct me if I'm wrong, is there's two ideas. One is we underestimate melancholy in our lives and the role of it. Like as many examples in your book describe, and as my basic example describes, people view it as sadness and kind of dismiss it as such, and that it's an emotion to be avoided. But your point is, A, it exists and it's not sadness, and it's and we should appreciate it more. And B, this this feeling of this melancholy or access to the sublime or poignancy actually connects us to kind of wisdom or like you say, human connection or empathy or just understanding more about the world around us, even nature. And I think ultimately it's almost like you're saying in the book that the ability to feel melancholy or intense melancholy is almost like a superpower in terms of surviving moments of grief and connecting to others and finding reasons to live and so on.
Yes, absolutely. All of the things you just said. And then I would add to those things that you just said, it's also connected to our ability to be creative in the first place. And there's been this kind of like age old question of like, well, is there something about creativity or creative people that it's somehow connected to depression in some way? And I think that's kind of the wrong question, because I don't think that that depression itself is helpful for creativity. We actually know the opposite, that it's not, because clinical depression is like a state of emotional numbness where it's very hard to do anything from there. It's more, I think, the sense of the happiness and sadness in everything, and the impulse to be longing for a world and a state that's better than the one that we're currently living in. And the longing to transform the imperfection that we're living in into something that's closer to perfection. That's really the heart of creativity. And so this state of mind is actually incredibly precious. It's a kind of creative elixir.
So let me just play devil's advocate here. Of
Mhm.
course, if let's say you referred to in the US we have this tyranny of positivity. Like everybody's got to be positive, get up on the stage and jump around and be rah rah and you're gonna go get them and get that job, get that money, get that career, get that relation, whatever. And uh, uh, sometimes striving for those types of goals helps you to be creative as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we need the positive side also. So it's not to say that we should only be in this one state of mind. It's just to say that this state of mind is a kind of an overlooked superpower. And that when we overdo it on the rah rah, jump up, go get 'em, that's not telling the truth about what most human beings experience. So it can feel momentarily motivating until when you're like in a room full of people and everybody's in that rah rah state of mind. And then you're back in the room by yourself and you're like, wait a minute, that's not actually how I feel. Or that's not actually what's true. And so the motivation of that can wear off quite quickly.
Yeah, because I mean, let's break it down in terms of creativity. First off, when you're really positive, in the way I was describing before, it's a very forward-thinking kind of emotion. Like whatever happened in the past is the past. Now I'm moving forward, and I'm going to start achieving, no matter regardless of what happened before. I'll learn from my mistakes because that's what happens. Failure is good because I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and
Mhm.
then I'm going to move forward and be positive. But the thing about melancholy, and I'm just trying to understand it in real time here about the connection with that and creativity, is like take the example, oh, if I miss my daughters when they were real little and I remember different things that happened and so on, it a it connects me to that story again, so I can write that story or similar to it and evoke similar emotions, and I'm really there. And and it makes me creative in that sense. And I guess another way is that creativity is about solving problems. And so I
Yes.
have a problem. One is that I miss, and I'm going in, I'm hammering on this one example, but in this particular case, my problem, if there is one, is that I'm missing those earlier times with my children. And creativity is all about solving problems, really, in a way that's ultimately, pleasing. Even a song that's written in a minor key, it kind of finishes on a, I don't want to say an upbeat moment, but it kind of comes full circle. It takes you out of the sadness at the very end somehow. And so maybe that's two connections to creativity.
I think that's right. And I would add to it, there's a kind of emotional resonance to it. So, like, if you had just told me a story about like a great time that you had had at your daughter's 4th birthday party, like that would have been a good story and an interesting story. Um, if you add to it, wow, I'm actually feeling this incredible poignancy because my daughter's now, I don't know how old she is, but my daughter's now grown up, and I'm remembering that moment at the 4th birthday party, and I'm connected to that moment, but it's also in the past, and like I'm really drawn in to the way you're telling that story, because you're telling it kind of several layers deep, as opposed to just the story itself. And what you're also doing is like you're connecting, when you tell it that way, you're connecting to what I believe is the deepest fundamental human impulse that we don't talk about so much in our very secular culture. But it is the longing to feel connected to a more perfect and beautiful world. And you see the manifestations of this quite clearly in our religions, where we're longing for Eden or for Zion or for Mecca. But there's a secular manifestation too of like we're longing for somewhere over the rainbow, or you're Harry Potter, and the moment you enter the story as a baby, you're in a state of longing because an hour ago your parents were just killed. So you're entering the story as an orphan, and it's like it's understood psychologically in that story that the very catalyst of everything that Harry Potter is about to do, the catalyst for that is the fact that he was just orphaned and arrives on the Dursleys' doorsteps, without parents. And like, there's a reason that so many of our greatest children's stories, the protagonist is an orphan, or that like Homer, that Odysseus in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, like the epic adventure starts when he is seized by homesickness and he's like weeping on a beach, longing for his homeland of Ithaca. And that's what gets him to take the adventure in the first place. So that's kind of the magical state to tap into.
And I guess also, and you suggest this in the book, is that those who tend to feel more melancholy than others, and you have this bittersweet quiz that you refer to kind of rank yourself. But when you're feeling I shouldn't compare. I shouldn't make it relative to others. When someone's feeling melancholy, they're usually more empathetic. They're usually more connected to other people's emotions. And for creativity, obviously, you need to be not just about your own emotions, but to be able to express the emotions of others in a story, for instance, or to connect to the emotions of others through music or through painting or whatever. So I guess that's another part of the connection between melancholy and creativity.
Yeah, because it's like, why do you write music? Why do you write a poem? Why do you do something creative? Like, would you do it if you were the only person on earth? Would you still feel that impulse to self-expression? You might feel some of that impulse, but not to the same degree, because like ultimately it's self-expression in the service of communion with the people who are going to experience that which you're creating. And the most amazing moment as a consumer of art, whether you're a reader or looking at a painting or whatever, that the sublime moment is where you realize that the artist has just expressed something that you yourself have experienced, and you're having this moment of communion between the creator and the gazer upon it. So that's what's happening.
That's a really good point. Like, even though I make it a practice to write every single day, and I've been doing this for decades, I don't keep a diary. And people say, why don't you keep a diary? And I say, I have no interest in just writing to myself. So I can only write if there's a glimmer of hope that other people can read it.
That's so interesting, actually, because I don't keep a diary right now, but I have throughout my life. And And I do advise, especially younger people, to keep one because I do feel like it's important to get into the habit of telling the full truth in a way that's much harder to do when you know other people are going to read it. And even when I was writing this book, and especially the memoir parts of it that were hard for me as a private person to be sharing, like I had to kind of go through a thought process of saying, well, no one's going to read this, at least not yet. And then you can figure out later what people will read. So I think it's a balance.
Yeah, it is a balance, but I always challenge myself to say things about myself that I'm afraid to reveal. Because then I feel at the very least, that's an in for people to come into something I write and say, "Oh my gosh, he said that about himself." So it's
Yeah,
it's a hook.
you do that a lot. I mean, do you have to overcome resistance before you do it? Or
Oh yeah,
is
I'm
it,
afraid every time. I have a rule. I won't hit publish on something unless if I'm afraid of what people will think. So obviously not
wow.
everything is like that, but most of the things I hit publish on are like that. And then sometimes people say, well, how are you going to remember things if you don't keep a journal or a diary? And I say, if I don't remember it, then it wasn't interesting.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm
interesting. I might have felt that in the past, but now I feel like I forget everything. So I have to write it down.
age for me does that. Like I don't remember as many things. I'm surprised when I look back at writing from 10 years ago, how much I remembered from 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
But then I'll have different things to write. Who knows? I don't know. But you know, why do you think the US, and maybe it's the world, but it definitely seems like the US specifically, has this tyranny of positivity? And Susan David, who's been on this podcast, also you referred to her mentioning that.
So in the book, I actually trace the history of this, and it's like a long history, but I'll say one thing about it, that when we became such a business-oriented society throughout the 19th century, what started happening is that, you clearly had some people who were succeeding and some people who were never succeeding, or maybe they would succeed and then they would blow up in some spectacular bankruptcy, which kept happening in the 19th century. And so
Heck, it happens in the 21st century.
and the 21st century. And so what this question started to be asked over and over again, which was, if someone fails at business, is it because of bad luck or external forces, or is it because of something inside the character or soul of that person that predisposed them to failure? And increasingly, that question was answered by saying, yes, it's something inside the person. And this is when you start having the language of winners and losers. And the word loser has increased in usage, kind of going up all the time. And if you start looking at yourself and at everyone around you through this prism of, is that person a winner or a loser? Then of course, you're never going to want to talk about melancholy or loss or sorrow or longing or anything like that seems to be kind of on the loss side of the ledger. You want to be projecting the emotions that seem to be associated with winning. And these complexities of holding happiness and sadness at the same time, and where that, and the sublime places that could lead you, those quickly get dispensed with. So that's where we are, and that's what we have to reclaim.
I think that's true, and I think failure also is associated with shame. Like you don't want people to know that you failed, even though later on, I feel like there's been a whole genre of failure porn lately where
Yes.
you can't succeed unless you fail, which I don't believe to be true at all. And I do agree with the people who say that it's largely is in your character when you do fail. I mean, there's a luck factor as well, but it's not necessarily in your character. It's experience. I think there's an old Chinese saying where you have to fail twice before you finally succeed. That because you just don't know enough. It's very complicated to succeed and then to grow from that. Like it's too easy to fall into your youthful bad habits after that first success.
But there also are so many other factors of just good luck and bad luck and external circumstances. And one of the headlines that I wrote about in the book, so even in the Depression, the Great Depression, 1929, when all these people are experiencing bankruptcy, not for reasons that have to do with themselves. Even then, there are these headlines that say things like, loser commits suicide after bankruptcy.
Mm.
So it's this view of like everything being intrinsic to the person.
Yeah, no, I agree, and there is definitely like some luck. I think it's probably just a case by case basis. I always, I have failed at different points, and I refer to it as taking ownership of it. Like I can't blame
Hmm.
anybody else because there's usually some things that where you could have mitigated risk even if you had bad luck. And I think that's why as one gets older and more experienced, the likely of having continuing success goes up. But okay, so there's two different directions to go. One is with the tyranny of positivity. I would add also this constant seeking for the frontier. So,
Mm.
it's again this idea that the past is behind us
Hmm.
and now we're moving forward. We got to just find what the frontier is. And now, of course, the frontier is not geographic, but there's several frontiers, and one of them, which you refer to a lot in the book, is mortality. How do we go past the frontier of current mortality and maybe live forever? And there's so many efforts and technologies and authors and scientists working on issues of anti-aging, and and I think to myself, I don't want to live forever. That seems really horrible. But like, maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is something I thought about a lot because part of the book research I did, I kind of plopped down in the middle of one of these conferences of people who are working on trying to live forever, or at least live for an incredibly much longer time healthily. And I guess I had the instinct like you of like, I don't think I'd really want to live forever. But one of those people did this thought experiment with me where he was like, okay, well, let's say you could push the button and decide the day that you're not going to live anymore. Would you push it tomorrow? And of course, the answer is no. And then it's like, okay, would you push it the next day? No. Would you push it a year from now? No. Okay, so like when would you push the damn button? And I don't know. It's very hard to imagine the day that you would actually push the button. And again, this is granting that you're living healthily. So we're not talking about living in with illness and decrepitude. This is like everything's fine with your body. So that was really interesting to me as a challenge.
That is an interesting thought experiment, but I think it's a false thought experiment
How so?
because, like you said, first off, if you are sick and unhealthy, there are many times you would press that button.
Totally.
Let's say
Totally.
you had a stroke and you were locked in and you were vaguely aware, but you couldn't move, and of course you're going to press that button every single day. So that's an extreme, but that happens to millions of people.
No, that for sure. But he's saying if you were healthy, because what
Right.
what the people working on this are not pushing for another 100 years of being decrepit. They're pushing for lots of extra time where you live healthily.
But the other thing it assumes is that your thoughts and emotions don't change as you age. Like, of
Hmm.
course, right now I'm not going to push it, and it's probably true on any given day. I would never say yes, I'm going to push it the next day when given that choice. But part of it also is the mystery. There's that
Yeah.
you don't know when it's going to happen, and eventually people get sick. I mean, nobody wants to die tragically in an accident, but eventually people get sick. Even if you live 150 years old, you get sick, and things happen. So you're right. I guess it's interesting. Like if I have a high quality of life and I'm living like I'm 20 years old when I'm 120, I probably would not want to press it. But I don't know how I will feel then. Like my thoughts and emotions. Like, do you ever look back? You've been writing for a long time. Do you ever look back at writing you did maybe even 15, 20 years ago, and there's a different person writing it a little bit. Maybe you were a little bit more confident or positive or aggressive somehow in your writing. I don't know. Like, have you noticed changes in yourself as you write through the years?
Oh, I mean, well, I definitely changed through the years. It's funny. I haven't asked the question so much about my writing, um, but I change a lot.
I mean, I look back at my writing and I definitely see more arrogance from like if I look at things I wrote 30 years ago, uh, I feel like, oh gosh, this guy is a horrible writer. There's so much arrogance in it.
I mean,
And
you're
and,
prob-
and it's your point earlier about writing and creativity and about how people don't want to see just like a great story about a 4-year-old's birthday party. They need a little bit of angst in it. A little, Carrie Fisher once said, no one wants to read about good-looking rich people who never have problems.
Yeah, and but I don't think that's only because they feel jealous about those of such a person. I think it's more that they feel it's not true.
Yeah.
Like they want to read about the truth. They want like one of the whole point of creating anything in the storytelling genre, I think, is to express the kinds of truths that people don't usually say out loud. Like, I think that's part of why people are so drawn to what you do, because you're constantly saying things that most people don't say out loud. And it's such a generous act to do that.
Like, are there any heroes in literature who aren't at least in doubt of their own abilities and personality and so on?
I mean, there may be ones who are not in doubt, but then the story becomes like nemesis and hubris, right? Like you had too much hubris, and so then you meet your nemesis. So like there's
Yeah.
always something.
So if they don't have doubt in the beginning, they have doubt a few chapters in.
Yeah, because like that's the whole point of the story. Like nobody gets away with too much hubris or lack of doubt.
But it's interesting though, like why do you think people, I mean, I guess it's normal for people to want to live as long as possible and to live forever. And you're right, that thought experiment is interesting, but I don't know, would you want to live like thinking about it right now? Let's say the thought experiment is not do you want to die tomorrow, but do you want to die sometime within the next 200 years? Then it's a little less clear. You'd probably still say, "Oh, I'm not going to push that button," but it's a little less clear. I think the answer.
I know it's really hard. I don't know. 200 years, I'm like, yeah, I'll probably stay. Like, I'd like to know my great great grandchildren and all this. I don't know. Maybe there comes the time that I guess I honestly don't know the answer. But what I ended up feeling like was that both things are true, which is to say, I'm on the side of all these scientists who are pushing to extend our health spans to some untold degree. I'm on their side. And at the same time, I feel like that's not the world we have right now. And we're not going to have that world anytime soon. And so in this world that we have, I want to understand, what does it mean to live in this world, and what are the what what is this sensation that I have, that this feeling of us all being connected through this burden of mortality, the fact that we know that everybody we love is going to die. That's such a burden. And yet there's such a communion in that because we're all united in that reality. And that's something I like to pay more attention to.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Maine, Mizzen and Maine.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues to or these different sports to to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. One thing that you mentioned about mortality, like knowing that you're getting older and probably closer in percentage to the time you die compared with the time you're born, is that you call this the paradox of aging in the book, which is that as you age, you're wiser and you have less stress. At least many people. I don't think that's true for all older people, but you have less stress in general. And I always used to think it was because they have less stress because they're going to die soon, so they don't have to like make enough money to live for 50 more years. They only have
Right.
to make enough money to live for 15 more years or whatever. So, but why do you think older people in general, according to these studies that you mentioned, have less stress than younger people? You mentioned a little bit that the younger people think the music's never going to end, and the older people are distinctly aware that it will end, so they appreciate every moment a little more, I guess, idealistically. But is that true? Like, what do you think it is about aging?
Yeah, I mean, the fascinating thing about those studies is that those were done by Laura Karstensen at Stanford, and she had all kinds of hypotheses for why it was true. But she ended up finding that the real key to it was just the appreciation of life's fragility. And that as an older person, you're like intensely aware of how fragile it all is because you know you only have a few years left. But she ended up finding that when she looked at younger people who also had been made to feel life's fragility, maybe because they were living through political instability or some other kind of crisis, that those people had these same other emotional benefits of feeling less stress and being more focused on meaning and depth and in-depth relationships and all of this. So it's really fragility itself, or the awareness of fragility itself, that seems to carry all these benefits. And I think that's the thing that I have felt instinctively all my life when I listen to that kind of music, because that we started talking about. You know, what that music does is it puts you in mind of fragility and it makes you aware of how intensely precious everything is. So it gets you into this deeper state.
Yeah, yeah. So given that there's all these benefits to melancholy and this state of melancholy, or I don't know what you call this, sublimeness or poignancy, how can we cultivate that more in ourselves? And you talk about this a lot in the book, but what are so I could throw out this your suggestions to you, but so what are some of your suggestions?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, I asked Laura Karstensen, the Stanford psychologist, what she would recommend given her findings. And the first thing she said, and I don't think she knew that this was where I had started, but the first thing she said was to listen to that kind of music. So I will say I have a Bittersweet playlist on Spotify and Apple Music that I just put up for people who want to do that.
Really? So if I search Susan Cain's and Spotify, I'll come up with your Susan Cain's Bittersweet and Spotify.
Susan Cain, Bittersweet. Yeah, you'll find it there. And it's also on my website, if that's easier, which is susancain.net. You can get a link over there. But it's also helpful not only to interact with that kind of music specifically, but just to interact with beauty in general. Because you know that feeling when or that experience when you're interacting with something intensely beautiful and it's so beautiful that it makes you cry, like you have tears in
Yeah.
your eyes. And you think, well, what is that? Why am I moved to tears by something beautiful? And I think the real deep answer to that is that you see that kind of beauty and it reminds you of that state that we're all longing for. You know, it's like a representation of the Garden of Eden. It's a representation for the place we feel like we're meant to be, where we're actually not, you know, but it's like a momentary glimpse of it. And those kinds of states are incredibly elevating and transformative. That's why we love to watch Olympic athletes, you know, or your favorite musician performing at a concert. It's like you're getting glimpses of Eden when you do that.
Why do you think that is? Because, okay, when I think of the Garden of Eden, I think of a place that's considered a perfect place where there isn't sadness. I'm trying to make the connection between these states and what you're saying about the Garden of Eden.
Because what I'm saying is that as humans, what we most long for is the place where there isn't sorrow. There's just perfect love, truth, beauty, goodness, kindness. All of it. Um, but but the awareness that we're not in that state is what paradoxically brings us a little bit closer to it.
And so okay, so listening to this music, and by the way, I just looked at your list. It's a very beautiful list.
Thank you.
I love almost everything on here. I'm surprised you don't have "Nobody Knows" by Leonard Cohen. That's like my favorite Leonard Cohen song.
Oh
And
my
you have a bunch
gosh.
of
I
Leonard
mean,
Cohen.
I could have had like 20 Leonard Cohen songs, but I felt like I couldn't make it a Leonard Cohen playlist. So I had to exercise some restraint. But I'm actually adding to the list over time. And on Apple, it's now a little bit longer. I have to catch it up on Spotify.
You should almost let people add to it on, have their own personal Bittersweet lists on your Bittersweet website. So have a functionality where people could submit their own lists.
That's
'Cause it
actually
might
a
be interesting.
really good idea because I've asked people on social media, what are your favorite songs? And I always get back a gazillion answers and then I don't know what to do with it. So yeah, just to have a co-created list is a great idea.
Yeah, like a collaborative one. But yeah, it's now okay, so what's another method for kind of cultivating these feelings? Because again, in a very short term, you'd want to cultivate this feeling if you want to be creative, because there's evidence that this is linked to higher states of creativity. But
Mhm.
in general, to your point throughout the book, it increases empathy, increases your connection, ability to have human connection, and so on. So
Mhm.
what's kind of like other methods that you have found successful?
Yeah. Okay. So here's a couple more. One is the Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering death, which sounds to our contemporary ears like a really morbid practice, but it's not just the Stoics who did it. Like Buddhist monks have done this. Many contemplatives have done this, and it's basically just reminding yourself that you may not be here tomorrow. You have no idea, and I will tell you that has been like so concretely, personally transformative for me. And to the story you were talking about with your kind of nostalgia for your daughter's childhood. I had this experience. My kids now are 12 and 14, but a few years ago when I was really deep into writing this book and I was totally busy and we had this ritual of bedtime every night. And I loved that ritual. And that was the time that the kids would most open up and everything. But it was really hard for me not to be looking at my cell phone also. My kids would look away for a minute and I would like sneak a look at my email because I was so busy. But I started doing this practice of memento mori and I completely stopped looking at the cell phone. Like I would say to myself, they may not be here tomorrow. You may not be here tomorrow. You have no idea. And it wasn't like I was wallowing in sorrow over that feeling. It was just like a reminder. That's all it was. But I put the cell phone down right away and I didn't feel the impulse to pick it back up again. So it was like instantly I was reminded of how precious every single one of those moments was.
Yeah, no, and like you said, I think that's yes, the Stoics kind of name it, but I think it's a practice that occurs in almost every religion. Like, you ever read the book or see the movie The Razor's Edge? It's by Somerset Maugham, but
Oh gosh, I read
Bill
that
Murray
book a
starred in the
million years
movie.
ago. I didn't see the
Yeah,
movie, but I read it decades ago, I think.
it's based on this real life spiritual figure, Ramana Maharshi, who, according to his story, everybody's got their origin story, but he was like walking to school one day and he lay down on the ground and tried to imagine what it was like to be dead, as if he was dead that moment. And
Uh-huh.
that for him was a big spiritual moment. And the next day, he basically dropped out of school and just started meditating, and they built a whole he meditated and didn't speak for years, and then they built a whole ashram around him, and then he started giving lectures and so on. But that's
Hmm.
just one story among many that
Yeah.
are like that. But okay, so listening to this type of music, doing the memento mori practice,
Engaging with
uh
beauty in general.
so like nature and things like that.
Yeah, or like I'll just tell you my version of it, but it's going to be totally different for everyone. This is just my idiosyncratic thing. But
Going
I
to
s-
fashion shows? No, I'm
no,
just kidding.
I actually started a couple of years ago. I started asking people for their favorite art accounts on Twitter, and I started following all of them. So now my feed is much more full of art than it is full of, toxic Twitter nonsense. Um, and so I started every morning, especially when I was writing the book. I did this every day. I would pick a favorite piece of art, and then I would think of a poem or a quotation or an idea that I loved that went well with the art. And I would post that every morning on social. And then that started attracting other people who wanted to be living at that frequency. And it was such a grounding way of starting the day. So I still try to do that.
I love that idea.
Yeah. And it's quite time consuming, by the way.
Like, would you research the art, or were you just focused on like what you felt from the art?
Mostly I was focused on what I felt from it. If I'd had more time, I actually would have loved to go down the rabbit hole of finding out all about that particular work of art. And sometimes I would do it, but not always.
In the book too, you mentioned humility, like cultivating humility is a good way to get in touch with these emotions.
Yeah. And I think it was Dr. Keltner, I'm not sure now who did this research, who found that like the very act of bowing down puts you into that state of humility, which was really interesting to me. Like if you think of, how often like in a yoga practice, you'd have these gestures of lowering your head. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, and there are types of like Buddhism or Zen Buddhism specifically where the meditation is just bowing.
Yeah.
Like you bow 1,000 times. And of course, in Islam, you bow to Mecca 5 times a day. And so bowing's a part of
Right.
a lot of
Yeah. And then
religious practices.
in the Aleinu, the Jewish prayer also has the automatic bowing as part of it. So yeah, there really is something to that, which feels so antithetical to kind of contemporary Western culture. Like, why would you be bowing down to anyone or anything?
Why do you think, for evolutionary reasons, bowing is? I mean, it sounds like bowing is biologically connected to this feeling. And so why do you think, for evolutionary reasons, the humans who survived, as opposed to the humans who died, have this reaction to bowing?
That's a really interesting question. And so I don't know the answer, so I'm just speculating. But I mean, we're not designed to be able to live on our own. Like even those of us like me who like I really want and need and love a lot of solitude, we're still not inherently solitary creatures in terms of how we survive. So um I think like being able to remember that uh that it's not just us, and kind of deferring to the fact that, like, if you think of us as living in tribal groups, and each member of the group has their own power that they're contributing to the greater group ability for all of them to survive. Bowing down is a way of acknowledging the other powers that are there that you don't have yourself.
That's probably true, because probably if someone was too, let's say, arrogant in a tribe, and tribes were only like 30 people at the time, like 40,000 years ago. If you were too arrogant, you would probably hurt the tribe. Like you wouldn't contribute to the tribe's well-being, ability to survive.
Yeah, and as a result, you would be taken down. I mean, I know that this is true in chimpanzee tribes, that, if there's one dominant male who becomes too dominant in a way that's not serving others, two or three other males who are more collaborative by nature, and they'll team up and depose the dominant one.
And I guess this is also related, like you mentioned a lot throughout the book, that melancholy is related to feelings of separation. Like, again, the example, I'm separated by time and distance from these 4-year-old daughters I used to have.
Yeah.
Maybe you feel melancholy to kind of close that distance in whatever ways you can. And that kept tribes together.
Yeah, I mean that fundamental pain of separation, that's that same fundamental longing that I believe is at the heart of humanity, and it's at the heart of why humans have always had a figure of God. Again, like whether, in your modern manifestation you consider yourself atheist or secular, it's almost irrelevant. But the fact is that we come into this world with this kind of longing for A love that is never separable,
Yeah.
a love that isn't touched by time in the way that you're talking about. Whether you see that as divine love or as a human love to which we aspire, it's kind of the same thing.
So let me ask you, like, I know, while you were writing this book, your brother passed away from COVID, your father, right, passed away from COVID.
Mm-hmm.
How did this affect the writing of the book?
I actually really don't think it affected the writing of the book because I was already so deep down this path before COVID ever happened. I would say it was more that the fact that I was on this path affected the way I mourned those losses. It didn't take away from the raw grief of it, and I remember in the days after each of those losses, I remember feeling physically nauseous for days. It was just this nausea that I couldn't kick. It eventually did go away. But there was something about having been so immersed in the idea of impermanence and the way in which we're all connected through that was a kind of solace. It was a kind of solace. And when I talk about this in the book, it's like two things are true at the same time. Number one, that the awareness of impermanence is an incredibly helpful emotional or spiritual practice. And number two is that it will never take you all the way there. And I in the book, I share this poem by this Japanese Buddhist poet, Issa. He's considered one of the great poetry masters in Japan. And he had this life where he kept losing all his children in infancy. And then finally, one of them survived to the age of 2 or 3, this beautiful daughter. And then she too dies of smallpox. And so he's totally distraught. And he writes this poem where he says, I know that this world of dew, like DEW, that this world of dew is just a world of dew, meaning I know everything's impermanent. And then he says, but even so. And so he's talking about these two truths that are both there. Everything's impermanent, but I'm never going to be okay with the fact that I lost my daughter. Never, ever, ever will I be okay with it.
I think this was a great insight in your book, or like reading your book. The difference between, like, everyone always says, you need to accept the fact that things are impermanent, but you make a distinction between acceptance and awareness. And you point out that it's basically enough to be aware that things are impermanent. You don't always have to accept it, because it might not be truthful that you're going to accept it, but being aware of it is a truth.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think accept for certain griefs and for certain traumas, I think acceptance is asking too much of ourselves, and it's not real. Like, it wasn't even real for this Buddhist master poet, even he was saying, this is how I feel. And he's basically saying, this is how you're going to feel too. Like, he knows someone else is going to be reading the poem, like to what we were talking about before, that he's not just writing this down for himself. He's writing it because he knows every single person reading it who's experienced a true loss is going to feel the same thing.
Okay, so I also have a question. I wanted to revisit Quiet for one quick second.
Sure.
Book, your earlier book, Quiet, which is about basically the experience of being an introvert, and it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it to everyone. It really helped me a lot. As you mentioned, it's a spectrum from introversion to extroversion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an introvert who's never shy. I have no problem, introducing myself to strangers or doing things a little out of the ordinary in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't go to a party.
Huh.
And like, I could do stand-up comedy on stage for an hour, but then if I have to talk to people afterwards for 10 minutes, that's it. I'm wiped out.
Oh, yeah. I have heard that from so many performers, because I don't know if this is what you feel, but what people tell me is they feel like when they're on the stage, they're kind of like controlling the inputs. They sort of know what's happening. But then when you're off the stage and you're interacting with 1,000 people at once, it's just too much coming at you.
Yeah, and I just don't know what to say to anybody. I don't feel like I can, it's somehow easier to connect when I'm like writing to a bunch of people or talking to a whole bunch of people. And And then the energy like immediately, even if I'm having a party in my own home, I have to go into like my bedroom every
Yeah.
10, 15 minutes. But what if you're in a relationship with someone who's an extrovert? Like
Mhm.
they love going to parties, they can easily navigate small talk or even medium talk,
Yeah.
and that gives them energy. And whereas like if you're an introvert, it's sort of like you're the opposite. You get energy when you're recuperating alone as opposed to when you're in a social situation. And there's nothing wrong with either situation, but I'm just wondering, you know, how would you recommend people who are together who are once an introvert, once an extrovert, how do they kind of even navigate their social schedule? One always wants to go out, the other wants to stay in.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is to talk about it and negotiate it out with an understanding of what each person's temperament is. And I say the understanding because if you don't have that, invariably there's some kind of feeling that each person is bringing in of like what's wrong with my partner that, like why does he have to go out all the time? Why can't he be just happy just being with me? Or, or the extrovert is thinking, why is he like having to stay in all the time? Um,
It's more like the introvert in the case of me is feeling like, why can't I talk to anybody after 15 minutes?
Yeah, well, that's because you're
And
living in a
I come out
culture
like a
that's.
storm. I'm a storm for the first 15 minutes and then the storm goes away.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, so many people feel this way. Um, but yeah, like it really does need to get talked out from both people feeling that both people's temperaments and preferences are okay. And then, like, once you've understood that or processed that, um, to just figure out and kind of in advance, okay, well, how often are we going to go out and socialize? And what is our socializing going to look like? And, maybe you agree that you're going to do like one big dinner party a month, but you're going to have you're going to follow that by 2 nights of Netflix on the couch or whatever it is that works for you. But instead of like trying to hash it out night after night after night, having a shared agreement on your approach to life is really helpful.
Yeah, that could be. Uh, we'll see. So,
Are you in a new relationship where you're
no,
navigating
no,
this?
no. And I'm overdoing it. Like, and you know, my wife and I, we lived in a very social area for a while. We moved down to Florida, and I was very good at introducing us to all the neighbors and all the people. Like I have, again, I'm not shy, and I'm willing to just go out there and say hi to people and start things up. And she's really good at continuing the relationship. Like I'm really
Uh-huh.
bad at like getting back to people, following up, and then going out to dinner and going out to parties. And she's very good at that. So it's very complimentary. It's a very good thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was just too much for me if I was out too many times, and it would be too boring for her if she wasn't out enough. And I think we kind of resolved it, but it's just a factor. It's not a bad factor in a relationship. It's just a factor
Mhm.
in our relationship
Yeah. Yeah.
that we're constantly negotiating that terrain.
And she can do some things on her own also, right? Where you don't have to go along.
Then I feel like there's something wrong with me. I'm just sitting at home while everyone's out having fun. But again, awareness is in this case more important than acceptance.
Well, I don't know. I was actually sitting here thinking the exact opposite. I think in this case, I think trying to get to a place of acceptance is actually really key.
Mm.
Um, because I think it is possible for you to get to a place where you accept that this is your preference of how you want to spend your time. And you'll still have the practical question of how do you work it out between you and your wife, or even the question between you of maybe sometimes you want to be out and social, even if it's a little uncomfortable, just because you want to make those connections with your neighbors or whatever,
Yeah.
where you're doing all of that from a place of 100% self-acceptance. And then you make the decision. I think that's possible to get there.
I think that's a good point because I think I tended to blame myself, and then I would get anxious like, "Oh, does everybody think I'm weird, or do they not like me because I want to go, I want to be the first one to leave." And really it had nothing to do with anybody. It literally just had to do with the fact that I was out of energy. I would get
Totally.
depleted so quickly. So,
I have a friend who's really good at this, and she never actually announced the following thing to me. I just observed her doing it. She like says yes to every social invitation, But like you, she comes in, going really strong and then peters out quickly. So always after, half an hour or an hour or whatever, she'll like with a big smile, very politely say her goodbyes. And no one really thinks about it. I think about it because I notice these things, but no one else does.
Yeah, I actually like the approach of not saying goodbye and just like disappearing. Once everybody's made contact with you, they're like,
Uh-huh.
oh yeah, James was here, but now he's not. And then it's kind of like just leaving after that. So,
Though the host will
it-
notice. I still feel like you have to say your goodbyes to the host because even though you think they're so distracted by their 100 other guests, I think they remember who said goodbye.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, Susan Cain, always, it's so enlightening and I learned so much from you. I just loved Quiet, and it's a constant presence on my bookshelf for years. Your book about introverts. And now the next book that's going to live on my shelf for years is Bittersweet, about, you know, basically about the benefits of melancholy, which I always sort of suspected and have even written about, but you really get into the scientific research and you tell such great and beautiful stories. And I love these techniques that I've been writing down while you've been talking. And I even love the songs on your Spotify list. It's inspired me to make my own Bittersweet list. So that's what made me start thinking you should let people do that on your website. It'd be kind of a fun
Yeah, I
thing.
really have to do that. Thank you for that idea.
And so thanks once again, Susan. And what's next? What are you going to write about next? Let me see if there's a theme. So there's introversion, there's melancholy. I don't know what could be the next one. What's the next one?
I have my next book idea, but I'm not telling yet, and I'm not even writing it yet. I probably won't even start for another year or so because I put so much into all my books that I need a break in between.
Yeah.
But I am going to be launching a podcast probably in the fall, so that will be a kind of in between project.
Okay, good. Well, congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
when you do that podcast, come on here again, and we'll talk about your podcast.
Oh my gosh, I would love to do that.
That'll be fun. So thank you once again, Susan, and I really appreciate it. And I loved Bittersweet.
Thank you so much, James, for having me. It's always so fun to talk to you.